It was the kind of night when the city glittered, as if trying to outshine the stars. But Sophie Lane felt the cold bite of being unwanted. The fall air in New York carried that sharpness between summer's end and winter's first whisper. She stepped out of the yellow cab in front of the Ward Plaza Hotel, its glass facade reflecting the neon haze from Times Square, a few blocks away. Inside on the 57th floor, a charity gala thrummed with polite laughter and champagne clinks. Sophie smoothed the red silk of her dress before walking through the revolving door. The gown hugged her in ways she knew drew attention. The cut was sleek but honest about her curves. She told herself confidence was an armor, but tonight it felt more like thin glass. She spotted Ethan Ward near the grand piano, a flute of champagne in his hand. He was the reason she was here. The man she had met on an upscale dating app 2 months ago, whose messages were full of charm and whose promises had been wrapped in words like opportunity and connection. He had insisted she come tonight, said he wanted to introduce her to people in the fashion world who could elevate her freelance styling business. But as soon as his eyes found her across the room, she saw something change in them. He excused himself from the cluster of sleek-suited men and women in diamond cuffs and walked toward her, his jaw tight. Sophie's smile faltered. Ethan's hand touched her elbow, just enough to steer her away from the crowd out toward the balcony where the air was cooler and the noise was muffled by glass doors. From up here, the city stretched in all directions, lit like a million tiny cameras. She waited for his smile, for a compliment, for some acknowledgement of the way she had braved the stairs in the lobby. Instead, he said almost in a whisper, but edged with steel, "You look too noticeable, not in a good way. This is a refined crowd." Sophie blinked, the words slicing more than the wind. Too noticeable meant too much of her in all the ways society told her to hide. She crossed her arms against the cold, against the sting in her chest. "I thought you wanted me here," she said, her voice steady despite the rising heat in her cheeks. Ethan's gaze slid away, down to the street far below. "I did. I thought you'd fit the image. I guess I was wrong." There was no apology, just a shrug of a man protecting his own reflection. Then he turned back toward the warm, golden room, leaving her alone on the balcony with the hum of traffic far beneath. Sophie stayed there a moment, the night air seeping into her bones. Behind the glass, laughter rose again. Glasses clinked, the world went on without her. She took a breath that tasted of exhaust and autumn leaves. When she finally stepped back inside, determined to find her bag and leave, she noticed a tall man in a black tailored suit watching her from near the bar. Not the kind of watch that stripped her down, but one that measured, that took in details quietly. He didn't look away when she met his eyes. His expression was unreadable, carved in restraint, but something about the way he held himself made her pause. Sophie forced her gaze down, moving toward the coat check. A hand reached out, not touching her, but halting her path. "You look like you could use some fresh air." "Somewhere else," the man said, voice low and even. Up close, she saw the faint lines at the corners of his gray-blue eyes, the kind you get from narrowing them against both sun and skepticism. His name, she would later learn, was Lucas Hale, owner of the very building they stood in, a man whose name floated through tech articles and business magazines. She recognized him vaguely from a Forbes cover, But that version had been smiling for the camera. This one was not. She hesitated. I was just leaving. Then let me give you a ride, he said simply, as if it was the most neutral offer in the world. Her first instinct was to refuse to cling to the idea of independence, even if it meant a cold walk to the subway. But something in his tone was free of the usual angles. She nodded once. They moved through a side corridor to a private elevator lined in dark walnut. In the mirrored wall, she caught her own reflection beside his. Her dress, her hair pinned high, his height and stillness beside her. Neither spoke as the elevator slid downward. The lobby was quiet now, the gala noise far above. Outside, a sleek black SUV waited, its headlights cutting across the pavement. Lucas opened the passenger door for her without a word. Sophie slipped in the leather seat, cool beneath her. As the car eased into the traffic, she looked out at the blur of city lights, each one a story she wasn't part of. She told herself it didn't matter, that Ethan had left her standing on that balcony, that the sting in her chest was just the cold. But when she glanced at Lucas in the driver's seat, one hand steady on the wheel, eyes forward, she caught a flicker of something else in his profile, an understanding of being out of place in a room full of people pretending they belonged. The SUV glided through the rain-slick streets, the rhythmic swish of the wipers filling the quiet. Lucas kept his eyes on the road, his posture relaxed, yet deliberate, as if he carried stillness like a shield. Sophie sat angled toward the window, the city sliding past in streaks of gold and red. She had never been in a car this silent, not because there was nothing to say, but because the silence itself felt purposeful. After several blocks, he spoke without looking at her. "You were with Ethan Ward tonight." The statement was not a question. Sophie hesitated before answering. "I was, or I thought I was." She let out a humorless laugh. "Turns out I was a mistake for his image." Lucas's mouth tightened, but he didn't comment. Instead, he asked, "Where do you live?" She gave him an address in Brooklyn Heights. He nodded, but as they approached the FDR Drive, an alert flashed on the dashboard screen. Lucas glanced at it, frowned. "Flooding on the main route, they've closed the bridge for the night." Sophie's brow furrowed. "So..." He took a turn toward the East River. "I have a place outside the city. You can wait out the closure there. It's closer than trying to get through the traffic mess they're about to have." She hesitated, the usual instinct to say no rising in her throat, but the thought of sitting in a taxi for hours in this dress while the temperature dropped was less appealing than the idea of an unknown detour. She studied his profile, focused calm. Not the kind of restless energy that set her on edge. "All right," she said quietly. The SUV moved on to a quieter road lined with warehouses, then toward the outskirts where the lights thinned and the dark grew softer. They passed a stretch of river shimmering under street lamps, before turning onto a private drive bordered by tall iron gates. The gate recognized the car and swung open. The house that emerged from the shadows was less a house and more a statement. Modern lines in glass and stone perched above the water lights, low and warm against the night. Lucas pulled into the garage and cut the engine. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and something darker, like the residue of old fires in the hearth. He led her through a hall with wide planks of oak, underfoot, past tall windows where the river pressed itself against the glass in ripples of black. The living room opened into a space anchored by a fireplace and a wall of shelves, though most of them were sparsely filled. There were no framed photographs on the mantel, no scatter of personal artifacts, just curated minimalism. Sophie stood near the fire while Lucas disappeared briefly into another room. When he returned, he carried a folded gray hoodie. "Here," he said, holding it out. She slipped it on the fabric, soft and faintly scented, of something crisp, maybe the soap he used. The sleeves fell past her hands. "Thank you," she murmured, the warmth settling into her shoulders. He moved toward the kitchen where the counters were clean, except for a stainless steel kettle. "Cocoa or coffee?" "Cocoa," she said, surprising herself. She wasn't sure the last time someone had asked what she wanted in such a simple way. While he worked, she wandered to the window. From here, the city was a distant smudge of light. Beyond the curve of the river, she could hear the faint lap of water against the dock. It was so far from the noise of the gala that she almost believed she had stepped into another world. He brought 2 mugs to the low table near the fire. She sat opposite him, the heat from the mug seeping into her fingers. They didn't rush into conversation. Instead, they let the quiet be a third presence between them. Finally, she said, "You don't talk much, do you?" He lifted one shoulder. "Talking is overrated. Doing is better." She studied him. "So why? Help me." He looked into the fire for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to stand in a room full of people who don't want you there." The statement landed in the space between them heavier than she expected. She wanted to ask more, but his eyes had returned to the fire, distant again. They finished their drinks and Lucas stood. "Guest room is down the hall to the right. Bathrooms attached. If you need anything, my room's at the other end." She rose, feeling the faint pull of exhaustion behind her eyes. "Good night, Lucas." He inclined his head, not smiling but not cold. "Good night, Sophie." In the guest room, she found a bed dressed in crisp white linen, a view of the river, and silence so complete. She could hear her own heartbeat. She slipped out of the gown into the hoodie and lay down, the smell of cedar and rain drifting in from the slightly open window. Somewhere down the hall, she imagined Lucas Hale moved through his house with the same measured steps he had taken all night, carrying secrets she could not yet name. The morning arrived draped in pale gray light, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sophie woke to the muted sound of water against the dock and the faint aroma of coffee drifting down the hall. She pulled the hoodie tighter, padded barefoot to the kitchen, and found Lucas already there, dressed in dark jeans and a charcoal Henley hair still damp from a shower. He glanced up from the French press. "There are eggs, toast. Help yourself." The tone was casual, but the offer carried the same understated courtesy he had shown the night before. She made a plate, taking a seat at the marble island while he poured coffee into 2 mugs. They ate without the pressure of forced conversation, the kind of silence that felt almost companionable. When the rain eased, he mentioned needing to check the dock lines and asked if she wanted to walk down. She followed him outside into the cool air, the river stretching wide and calm. The path to the dock wound past a small boathouse and a cluster of maple trees shedding their last leaves. Lucas crouched to tighten a rope, his movements efficient despite a faint stiffness in his left leg that she noticed now for the first time. He caught her glance but said nothing. Back inside, he disappeared briefly, and returned with a laptop, settling at the dining table to answer what looked like an endless stream of emails. Sophie wandered to the living room shelves, scanning the spines of books. Architecture, economics, a few novels with worn jackets. She found herself wondering what this house had been like before him, or if it had ever held anyone else. Around noon, he suggested lunch. She offered to cook half, expecting him to refuse, but he only asked if she knew her way around a kitchen. She smiled faintly. "I manage." She found pasta in a cabinet, tomatoes and basil in the fridge, and set to work while he leaned against the counter, watching without the hovering criticism she'd endured from past boyfriends. When the sauce splattered on her wrist, she hissed softly. He stepped forward, took her hand gently, and guided it under the cool tap. The contact was brief, but it sent a current up her arm. She dried her hands quickly, trying to ignore the awareness lingering in the air. They ate at the island, the conversation turning to her work. She explained how she styled clients for shoots and events, often dealing with a quiet but pointed comments about her own body. He listened without interrupting his attention, steady, not drifting the way people's eyes often did when she spoke. After lunch, Lucas suggested she see more of the property. The house unfolded in clean lines and open spaces, an office with a wall of glass, a gym, a guest suite she hadn't noticed before. Outside, a flagstone path led to a greenhouse filled with late-season herbs and potted lemon trees. She trailed her fingers over the leaves, breathing in the sharp citrus scent. "You keep this up yourself?" she asked. "Mostly," he said. "Though someone comes in once a week. It's quiet work." She could see the appeal. In the greenhouse's warm stillness, with light spilling through glass, it felt like the world was reduced to green and gold. They walked back toward the house. As the wind picked up, and when a gust caught her hair loose from its pins, she laughed, tucking it behind her ear. His eyes followed the movement, then flicked away. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened again, clouds hanging low over the river. Inside, Sophie curled into one corner of the sofa, with a book she'd pulled from the shelf, the hoodie sleeves pushed up to her elbows. Lucas sat across from her with a folder of documents, occasionally glancing toward the window. The sound of rain returned soft against the glass. At some point, she realized she had been reading the same paragraph over and over, distracted by the quiet rhythm of his presence. When she closed the book, he looked up, bored, not exactly, just thinking. About what? She hesitated, then said, "How strange it is to feel more comfortable here with a stranger than I do in most places with people I've known for years." His gaze held hers for a long beat. "Comfort is rare. Hold on to it when you find it." Dinner was simple grilled salmon, roasted vegetables. They worked side by side in the kitchen, her slicing carrots while he seasoned the fish. Their shoulders brushed once, twice, neither moving away. When her knife slipped slightly, his hand steadied the cutting board without comment. After they ate, he poured them each a glass of wine, and they sat by the fire. The flames threw shifting light across his face, softening the hard lines. She asked about his work. He gave her a condensed version: tech startup, rapid growth, eventual sale investments now. His tone was even almost detached, but she caught the undercurrent of fatigue, the kind that success did not erase. At one point, she asked if he missed it, the rush of building something from nothing. He considered, "I miss parts of it, but not the noise." "And you," he added, What would you change about your work? She smiled wryly. That people would stop thinking my worth depends on whether I fit into a sample-sized dress. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's on them, not you. The certainty in his voice startled her. Later, as the fire burned lower, she felt her eyelids grow heavy. She stood, thanked him for the evening, and started toward the hall. Halfway there, she paused, looked back. He was still watching the fire, the glass in his hand catching the last flicker before it dimmed. That night, she lay in bed, listening to the rain, the quiet weight of the house pressing around her. Somewhere in that stillness, she realized she was curious about the man down the hall. Not just the headlines, not just the fortune, but the way he moved through silence as if it were his native language, and the way without trying he had made room for her in it. The next afternoon, the rain had cleared, leaving the air washed clean and sharp. Sophie wandered through the house while Lucas took a call in his office, his voice low and firm behind the half-closed door. She found herself drawn toward a hallway she had not explored, lined with a few large abstract paintings. At the end was a room with the door slightly ajar. Inside, the light was dim but steady from a single wide window. A desk sat against the wall, its surface neat except for a stack of papers, a fountain pen, and a framed photograph face down. Something about the deliberate way it was placed made her pause. She told herself to leave it alone, but curiosity pressed harder. She stepped closer, fingertips brushing the edge of the frame before turning it upright. The photo was of a woman with dark hair and an easy smile, seated on the deck of what looked like this very house. There was a warmth in her expression that seemed to fill the frame. Sophie did not hear Lucas until his reflection appeared in the window. She turned quickly, guilt prickling her skin. "I am sorry, I should not have." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "It is fine," he said, though his voice was quieter than usual. Her name was Emily. My wife. The word was in the past tense, unadorned. Sophie searched his face for a trace of bitterness, but found only a controlled stillness. She died 5 years ago. Cancer. The way he said it was almost mechanical, as if rehearsed for 100 awkward conversations. Sophie set the photo back gently. That must have been. I cannot imagine. Lucas leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. She was here one day and gone the next. Not exactly, but that is what it felt like. Everyone tells you to move on. They do not tell you how to move with the absence. Sophie stood there, unsure whether to step closer or keep the space between them. You have not let anyone stay here since. It was not a question. No, he said simply. Until last night. The weight of that admission settled over the room. Sophie felt it not as a compliment, but as something heavier, an opening in the armor he carried. She wanted to ask why. Her why now, but some questions, seemed too fragile to touch. Instead, she said softly, "Thank you for trusting me with that." His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable, yet in them was a glint of something less guarded. Then he straightened as if the moment had run its course. "Come on, it is almost lunch." They left the room together, the photograph turned face down once more, but its image remained with her, the easy smile, the sense of a life that had been real and whole. She thought of the quiet in this house, of the spaces that seemed to wait for something or someone to fill them again. It was just past 9 that night when the first sign of trouble appeared. Sophie was curled up on the sofa, with a blanket scrolling through her phone, while Lucas sat across from her reading a report on his tablet. The chime of an incoming message broke the quiet. She glanced at her screen and froze. The sender was Ethan. The text read, "I know where you are." The words were followed by a link to an online gossip blog, notorious for tearing people apart with half-truths. Her stomach tightened. She clicked it and saw a headline in bold letters. Billionaire Lucas Hale hiding a new flame at his riverside mansion, accompanied by a grainy shot of her stepping into his SUV outside the hotel the night of the gala. Lucas noticed her expression change and set the tablet aside. "What is it?" She handed him the phone without a word. His eyes scanned the message and the article, his jaw tightening. This was not an accident. Sophie's pulse thudded in her ears. He must have tipped them off. Why? Lucas leaned back, considering. Ethan's father is in the middle of a Senate race. A story like this could be used to paint you as, what, a gold digger, a distraction, anything that undermines him or embarrasses his family. And if it drags me in, all the better for the clicks. The thought made her chest burn. I have done nothing wrong. Lucas's gaze was steady. That will not matter to them. The internet is not a court. It is an executioner. He stood pulling his phone from his pocket and called someone named Daniels. He gave quick instructions to monitor the property and keep the press off the road. Sophie sat, rigid fingers curling into the blanket. She hated the idea of strangers digging through her life, framing her body as scandalous in glossy pixels. The sound of tires on gravel drew both their attention. Lucas crossed to the window, his posture tightening. A black sedan had stopped just beyond the gate. Even from here, Sophie could see the faint shape of cameras through the windshield. A minute later, headlights appeared again, brighter this time as another vehicle pulled up behind the first. Lucas turned from the window. "Stay inside. I will handle it." She followed him to the door anyway, her bare feet silent on the wood floor. Through the glass, she saw the gate swing open and a figure stepped out of the sedan. Even at this distance, she recognized the tailored coat, the smug tilt of the chin. Ethan. He walked toward the house, flanked by two men, one carrying a camera rig, the other holding a small mic. Lucas opened the door and stepped onto the porch, his presence filling the space between them. Ethan's smile was thin. "Thought I would check on my friend here," he said loudly enough for the camera to catch. "Make sure she's being taken care of." Lucas's voice was flat. "You are trespassing. Turn around." Ethan gestured towards Sophie, visible behind Lucas through the doorway. "I just want to talk to her. Set the record straight." Sophie stepped forward until she stood beside Lucas, the cold air wrapping around her bare arms. "I have nothing to say to you." Ethan's eyes flicked over her, lingering on the hoodie that dwarfed her frame. "You think this is real, Sophie?" He tilted his head toward Lucas. "Men like him do not keep women like you around for long." The words hit like a slap, not because they were true, but because they were designed to burrow under her skin. Lucas's tone sharpened. "That is enough." Ethan looked at him with mock surprise. "Protecting her. How noble, but what happens when the story breaks and your investors start asking questions? You cannot shield her from all of it." The cameraman shifted to get a better angle. Lucas stepped down one stair, his shoulders broad enough to block Sophie from their view. Leave. Now. Ethan's smirk faltered, but he didn't move. One of the men beside him reached for something in his coat. Just a phone, but the movement was enough to send a jolt of tension through the air. Lucas's voice was steel. "This is your last chance." Sophie felt heat rise in her chest, a mix of fear and fury. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the cold. "You do not get to decide my worth, Ethan. Not anymore." For a moment, the only sound was the river moving in the dark. Then Ethan's smirk returned, brittle at the edges. "We will see." He turned, motioning to his crew, and they walked back toward the gate. But the knot in Sophie's stomach did not loosen. "This will not end here," she said quietly as Lucas closed the door. "No," he agreed, "but he will not touch you." His certainty was a wall she wanted to believe in, even as she knew walls could be climbed. 2 days later, the storm broke in full. Sophie woke to the sound of her phone buzzing non-stop on the nightstand. Half asleep, she reached for it only to see her name plastered across half a dozen tabloid notifications. The photos from outside Lucas's house had gone public. Headlines called her a mystery woman, a possible gold digger, an opportunist. Screenshots of her styling work had been pulled from her website, dissected by strangers who had never met her. By the time she made it to the kitchen, Lucas was on a call. His voice low but taut with control. When he hung up, he looked at her with something close to apology in his eyes. "It is everywhere," she said flatly. He nodded once. "I can have it pulled from some sites, but not all. The internet is a hydra." Sophie sank onto a stool, fingers gripping the edge of the counter. "This is exactly what Ethan wanted, to make me feel like I have no place in your world." Lucas came around the island and leaned on the counter beside her. He already failed Sophie. "You are here." She searched his face, wondering if he really believed that or if he was saying it to steady her. That afternoon, a charity gala Lucas had committed to months ago loomed on the calendar. His assistant called to confirm, cautioning him about the press presence. "You should not go," Sophie said when he ended the call. "You do not need more trouble." Lucas straightened, and in that moment she saw the decision solidify in him. "If I do not go, it looks like I am hiding. If I go without you, it looks like I am ashamed." Her pulse jumped. "Are you saying—" He met her gaze. "I am saying you are coming with me." The idea sent a rush of both fear and something warmer through her. She wanted to argue, but the conviction in his tone stopped her. Hours later, as she stepped out of the SUV with Lucas at her side, the air was thick with camera flashes and shouted questions. The bright assault of light made her blink, but Lucas's hand closed around hers, grounding her. He did not rush. He walked at a steady pace, his focus forward, his grip unyielding. A reporter's voice cut through the din. "Mr. Hale, is this your new girlfriend?" Lucas slowed just enough to look directly at the man. "This is Sophie Lane," he said, his voice carrying above the noise. "She is here because I wanted her here, because she deserves to be here." Cameras clicked in rapid fire. Sophie felt her cheeks heat, but not from shame. Inside the ballroom, the air was warmer, the noise shifting to the hum of conversation and clinking glasses. They moved through the crowd together, and she could feel eyes on them, whispers curling in their wake. But Lucas never let go of her hand. At one point, he leaned close, his breath brushing her ear. "You belong here more than half these people." She looked up at him, startled by the quiet fierceness in his tone. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of polite introductions and lingering glances. Every time someone's gaze lingered too long on her curves, Lucas's presence at her side felt like a shield. When they finally stepped back into the night, the cool air was a relief. In the car, Sophie turned to him. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said simply. The weight in his voice told her it was more than about tonight. It was about every time he had stood by and watched someone be diminished. Not this time. The days that followed were strangely calm, as if the public frenzy had burned itself out. Some gossip outlets moved on to fresher scandals, while others still carried her name in sidebars. But Sophie found she could breathe again without feeling the weight of invisible eyes on her every second. Lucas kept his schedule lighter than usual, often working from the long dining table while she spread fabrics and sketch pads at the other end. One morning, a delivery arrived for her several garment bags from a boutique she had long admired but never approached. A handwritten note inside one of them read, "We would love to collaborate on your next styling project." The owner had seen photos from the gala and reached out, intrigued by Sophie's confident presence in a world that often demanded uniformity. She looked up from the note to see Lucas leaning in the doorway, watching her reaction. "You did this," she said. "I made an introduction," he replied, nothing more. But the warmth in his eyes told her he was pleased to see her recognized. That afternoon, he asked her to take a drive with him. They followed the river north, the leaves turning to deep amber and crimson. Eventually, they pulled up to a smaller property, a white clapboard house with wide windows and a wraparound porch. Inside was mostly empty sunlight falling across bare floors. "I bought this years ago," Lucas said. "Never knew what to do with it. Now I think I do." She turned to him, curious. "I want to turn it into a studio for you. Space for shoots, fittings, whatever you need." The words caught in her throat. "Why would you do that?" "Because you are good at what you do, Sophie. And because I want you to have a place that is yours." The sincerity in his voice left no room for protest. She walked through the rooms, imagining them filled with racks of clothing, soft light, the murmur of clients admiring her work. When she returned to where he stood, she found his gaze on her in that quiet way he had, as if memorizing the moment. Over the next week, they began making plans for the renovation. Contractors came by, and Sophie found herself making decisions about paint colors and lighting with Lucas listening and weighing in only when she asked. In the evenings, they cooked together, the easy rhythm of shared space, settling into something that felt dangerously close to home. One night, after the last contractor had left, they stood in the nearly finished main room. The sun was setting, casting gold across the walls. Sophie turned to find Lucas closer than she expected, his eyes tracing her face, as if reading something written there. Her breath caught, but she did not step back. "Thank you," she said softly, "for this, for everything." His hand lifted fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. "You do not have to thank me," he said. "You have given me something too." She searched his face. "What?" "A reason to open the door again." The words were quiet, but they settled deep in her chest. She felt the space between them shift, the unspoken current they had both been aware of pulling them closer. But instead of closing the distance, Lucas stepped back, the corner of his mouth lifting in a faint smile. "Come on, we have work to do." That night, lying in bed at his house, Sophie stared at the ceiling, feeling both the ache of that almost and the certainty that they were moving towards something neither of them had planned, but both of them needed. Spring arrived almost without warning, the trees along the river breaking into pale green, the air softening with the scent of new growth. Sophie stood on the porch of the white clapboard studio, now filled with light and life bolts of fabric, leaning against the walls, a row of mannequins draped in works in progress. Her first client was due any minute, a local musician preparing for a tour. "In que te mueves?" Lucas was adjusting a light fixture sleeves rolled to his forearms. When he finished, he crossed the room to her, wiping his hands. "You are ready for this," he said. She smiled, feeling the truth in it. The months since that night on the balcony had changed her, stripped away. Layers of doubt she had carried for years. She had faced the sharp edges of judgment and come out standing taller. Lucas had given her space to be herself without asking her to fit into anything smaller. And in return, she had watched him step back into the world, letting people in where once he had shut every door. That evening, after the client left and the studio was quiet again, they walked down to the dock. The river was high from spring rain, the current steady and sure. Sophie leaned on the railing, watching the reflection of the setting sun ripple across the water. Lucas stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "I was thinking," she said softly, "about how different things might have been if I had walked away from you that night." "You didn't," he replied. "That is what matters." She turned to look at him. "I am glad I didn't." His gaze held hers, the fading light painting gold along the line of his jaw. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Not the kind with a flourish, but one of simple dark leather. He opened it to reveal a plain silver ring. "This is yours if you want it," he said. "No conditions, no promises beyond the one I make every day, which is to stay." Her throat tightened. She slid the ring onto her finger, her hand trembling slightly. "You already have," she whispered. They stayed there as the sun dipped below the horizon, the first stars appearing above the river. Later, as they walked back toward the house, she thought of all the places she had lived, all the rooms she had stood in, feeling too big or too small. None of them had felt like home until this, and she realized it was not the walls or the view or even the studio that made it so. It was the man beside her, the one who had seen her when others looked away, who had chosen to stay when it would have been easier to step aside. Sometimes home is not a place. It is a person who sees you and stays.